Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Kilroy, and I'm the Executive Director of Excise and Licenses. So thanks for joining our the first meeting for our marijuana licensing work group. We really appreciate you joining us. I'd also like to, before I get started, really say quickly thanks to my team who's helping to make this happen. Molly Duplashane is the co-chair of this committee. Bea Campbell has been working tirelessly behind the scenes to make this happen. Erica Rogers has been working hard, Layla Myers, Abby Borchers, and Joey Pena. So thanks to all of you guys for everything you've done. Also thanks to TS, our technology department, and Evan Pfaff for everything they've done. As you can see, this is going to be a virtual work group. We're doing that because of COVID-19 to be protective of public health and to comply with the governor's and the mayor's orders regarding social distancing. So thank you for your patience with us as we work through this. As you probably saw, I didn't know I was already live, but some of this is going to take us a while as we get up and going to make sure we can get this going smoothly. As we started looking at this, we have a number of licensing issues that we need to decide at Excise and License to then present to City Council for council action. This kind of work group process is not required by law. It's just something that we typically do. And so when COVID came, we first thought, maybe we don't do the work group meetings, maybe we just get going. There's always opportunity for public participation at the council level. But in the end, our team and our city decided, no, we definitely wanted to hold the public work groups. We wanted to hear from the public and that we would do that first. That's how we always do things. Then the decision was, well, do we wait until we can meet in person? Because we all prefer in-person meetings. And as we can see, some of the stumbles this morning or this afternoon shows why. We could have waited, but we decided, no, we're not going to wait. We're going to move forward and we're going to do this virtually and understand that it's not going to be perfect. So I want to thank everybody ahead of time for your patience with us as we go through this. Then I know we've got members of the community watching live, and I'm going to turn it over to Molly soon. And when Molly talks, she'll talk a little bit about how you can participate. But I want you to know right now, at any time, whether it's about these marijuana issues or any other marijuana issue, you can email us at marijuanainfo@denvergov.org. So any marijuana question you have right now or anytime, please email us there. We check that every day and we'll get back to you quickly. To our team members, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. We've got a great diverse group and a lot of people with a lot of specialized knowledge. So we've got technical people who understand maybe the technicalities of delivery or the technical aspects of the industry. And then we've got a lot of policy people, whether related to social justice, related to public health, related to safety. We think it's really important to have everybody weigh in on these ideas. Some of this material is going to be dense, and we really appreciate your your dedication to diving in and being part of it and being prepared for the meeting. But also don't feel bad if we have a meeting and it's not your area of expertise and you don't have too much to contribute. I was talking with Molly about that earlier. When marijuana first started being legalized, I served on a work group related to edibles and marijuana edibles, and I didn't have expertise in such things as what colors might appeal to children or what dosage levels we should use. And those kind of things I deferred to the people who had that expertise in youth or in public health. So we're really excited to have you all here. We understand everybody has some specialized knowledge. Don't feel pressured to jump in if you don't need to, but always do jump in when you have something to add, and we really look forward to a robust conversation. So with that, I will turn it over to Molly.
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks again. I just want to reiterate what Ashley said. We really appreciate your time and the effort that you're putting in to join us in this conversation and provide us the valuable input and feedback throughout this process. It really helps us build good quality policy, and so we're looking forward to hearing all of your input. So we sent out the agenda and some corresponding resources earlier this week. And so we'll go through that and we'll go through the presentation, but to kick it off and just to get started, I think the first thing we're going to do is just some introductions, since this is our first meeting, and allow each of you the opportunity to, you know, briefly, we don't want to use all of our time, but to briefly just kind of tell us who you are, and why you're, you know, what your interest is in serving on the work group. So I'm going to go through the roster that we have for the work group, and we'll just do it in alphabetical order by last name. So I'll call on you, and if you just want to introduce yourself, that'll give us all an opportunity to know who's in the work group and what your background is. So let's go ahead and start. Actually, not in alphabetical order, it's just who's first on the roster, but we have Councilwoman Kendra Black on the phone, or in the meeting as well. So do you want to introduce yourself, Councilwoman?
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks for including me on this. I am on the Denver City Council, and I previously chaired the City Council Marijuana Committee, and it's an issue that I'm very interested in. Thank you.
Great, thanks for being here. And then we have Councilwoman Candy Tabaka.
Hello, I represent Denver's District 9. I live in an 84% Latino neighborhood, and we have a disproportionate concentration of the marijuana industry in our community. Over 200 licenses within a 15 square mile radius, and only one owned by a person of color. And so I'm very interested in the equity elements related to marijuana. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilman Chris Hines.
Hello, this is Chris Hines, Denver City Council's District 10, or as I like to say, Denver's Perfect 10. It is the central area of Denver, and so it includes Uptown, Cap Hill, those neighborhoods where some of the highest percentage of interest and acceptance for cannabis is in the city of Denver. And so I'm very interested in learning more about cannabis. I use a wheelchair for mobility. I'm the first to serve on city council with a physical disability that requires a wheelchair. And I know a lot of people who have similar injuries to mine who rely on medical cannabis. And so I'm interested in the conversations in general, but in particular today's conversation, because a lot of people with injuries similar to mine could get a lot of benefit from medical delivery. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, so now we'll kind of jump to alphabetical order, and we'll start with Kenneth Allison. Do you want to introduce yourself, Kenneth?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Ken Allison, a former state and federal health inspector, working now with All About Hemp, which is a distribution, and I'm looking for potentially one day owning a shop, a marijuana shop. Thank you.
Great, thank you. From the Denver City Attorney's Office, we have Anshul Baga.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, I'm Anshul Baga. I work at the Denver City Attorney's Office. I've been there for about 5 or 6 years. I generally advise the city and various city agencies on marijuana and hemp-related issues, and specifically the Department of Excise and Licenses on all of their licensing issues.
Great. And then we have John Bailey. Hi, John. Well, we can't quite hear you, so if you're speaking, it looks like you're off mute, but it doesn't, we don't hear you. We'll try to come back to you, John, in just a minute. And we'll move on for now to Sarah Belstock.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
My name is Sarah Belstock. I work at Denver Public Health, and I manage our behavioral health promotion programs, so with a strong focus on substance use prevention and mental health promotion throughout the lifespan. And in addition to that, our work is really focused through a lens of health equity with a strong commitment to community engagement.
Great, thank you. And then we have Truman Bradley.
Hi, Truman Bradley, Executive Director of the Marijuana Industry Group. I started participating in the Denver licensed cannabis arena about 10 years ago when I started a vertically integrated cannabis company. 5.5 years later, I started another one. And both of those companies were members of the Marijuana Industry Group, which is the oldest and largest trade association for licensed cannabis entities and ancillary companies here in the state. And excited to work with all of you today.
Thank you. Diane Cooks, are you on the line? Let's see if I can find you. So I don't see Diane unless you're on one of these numbers that I don't recognize. So we'll move on and then we'll check back in a little bit to see if we can find you or if you're available. So next we have Sean Coleman.
There, am I unmuted now?
Yep, you're good.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Sean Coleman, 36 Solutions, Public Affairs and Consulting. I've been a lobbyist working in cannabis policy for, wow, almost 10 years, I think. Well, longer than 10 years, since I got back from DC working in Chair Pulse, then Congressman Pulse's congressional office. I think I'll be able to be particularly useful for this group because I work very closely on the accelerator program as well as the drafting of the hospitality license bill. And of course, having long experience in this industry and both in an area of general social justice policy, representing Drug Policy Alliance, I'm very interested in looking at how we can move this conversation forward, making sure that both all cannabis consumers have access and availability, particularly in this public health crisis, as well as ensuring that moving forward in cannabis industry 2.0, that we have a more equitable path forward. So looking forward to working with everyone.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Next, we have Jacqueline Flug.
Hi, Jacqueline Flug. I am an attorney with Drizzly, the nation's largest e-commerce marketplace for on-demand alcohol delivery. And Drizzly has just launched Lantern, which is an e-commerce marketplace for cannabis delivery. Personally, I'm a former prosecutor from the Bronx, New York, spent 7 years as a prosecutor and also served as the general counsel for the New York State Liquor Authority, where I helped create the legal framework for e-commerce and alcohol delivery. Hope to be of help here.
Great, thank you. Michelle Garcia from the Mayor's Office of Social Equity and Innovation.
Hi, my name is Michelle Garcia. I'm with the Mayor's Office of Social Equity and Innovation, and I actually first started working on cannabis policy in 1996 when I went to work for Mark Kleiman at UCLA, and have been really excited to see how policy and the industry have developed over the last 24 years. And I'm excited about a focus on equity. I think it's long overdue and excited that it's going to be a priority here. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And Michelle Holine?
Hello, I'm Michelle Holine. I'm with Denver Public Schools. I manage our prevention programs, which include substance use prevention. And I'm really interested in ensuring that we're focusing on access to youth and any other potential impact.
Great, thank you. And then do we have Lieutenant Howard from the Denver Police Department?
Hi, I'm here. Lieutenant Andrew Howard with the Denver Police Department. Thank you for having us here today. I'll be representing the police department through this process. And really, we're interested in a few things, and mainly safety. Safety of the delivery personnel, safety of the buyers, safety of the affected neighborhoods, and certainly with the goal in mind to make sure that the delivered marijuana lands in the intended hands. So look forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Great. Okay, let's see. We have Dan Pavone next.
Hey everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Great to be here with you all. Dan Pabone from a company now known as Schwaz, formerly Medicine Man Technologies, serve as general counsel and head of government affairs for that company. Before that, worked in the state legislature developing cannabis policy for the state of Colorado. in part for the last 8 years or so, and have worked with very diverse groups like this in developing that policy. So looking forward to learning a lot in this process.
Great, thank you. A couple more left. We have Jessica Scardina.
Hi there, can you see me?
Yep, I can.
Hi, I'm Jessica Scardina with Vicente Cedarberg. I'm a cannabis regulatory attorney and I chair our Colorado Regulatory Law Department. I've been practicing cannabis regulatory law for about 6 years now.
Great, thank you. Ian Sieb.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ian Sieb. I am currently Governor Polis Special Advisor on Cannabis. Prior to me assuming that role just over a year ago, I was one of Denver's, really Colorado's very first licensees with Denver Relief, which was a vertically integrated establishment. Additionally, I am the former past two-time chairman of the National Cannabis Industry Association, have been intimately involved with the industry for over a dozen years. And in my new role I've been in it for a year, in my role as the governor's policy advisor, we're currently developing our strategy and our WIGs, our wildly important goals for this next year. And I plan to make social equity one of those main agenda items for goals for both myself and for the state. So this is incredibly timely with what it is that we are doing. And just want everybody to know that I came into this role after session ended last year. So this will be the first opportunity to start fresh with a new session going from start to finish. And so really looking forward to talking about social equity at the state level and how we can complement what local jurisdictions like Denver are hoping to accomplish. Thank you.
Okay, great. So Ryan Tatum.
There we go. Hey, everybody. My name is Ryan Tatum. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Cultivated Synergy. For those who are not familiar, we've been around for the past 6 years. We're a workspace event venue offering business services geared towards the cannabis and hemp industries. I feel we sit in a very unique position because we have a large array of clients on all sides of the industry, from plant touching, transportation, ancillary, and then aside from just working on the business side with other business owners as the clientele, we also have a really strong touch and engagement with just the community overall, cannabis advocates, business owners, people in the neighborhood. We kind of play that two roles. So a little bit of my background, I served a role on the state work group last year for helping with the regulations and things at the state level. And I'm really excited for the opportunity to do the same again now with Denver and work with all of y'all.
Great. Next we have Art Way.
Yeah, hi everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, Art Way. I've been a drug policy reformer for nearly a decade now, going back to the core campaign for Amendment 64, and have stayed involved from both a regulatory perspective and criminal justice perspective. And so I'm doing the same work now as a consultant with Equitable Consulting, and look forward to discussing broader equity concerns and trying to incorporate the accelerator program.
Great, thank you. And then we have Sarah Woodson.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Happy to be here today. My name is Sarah Woodson. I'm the executive director of an organization called The Color of Cannabis. And what we focus on is providing a pathway for restorative economic and criminal justice to people that have been negatively impacted by the war on drugs. So social equity is our main focus when it comes to the cannabis industry. And we do those things by advocating for legislation, public policy, business education, and technical assistance to be able to provide people an opportunity to actually have sustainable businesses, and jobs in the industry. Prior to that, I've been running a hospitality business called Cushion Canvases for the last 3 years, and it's pretty simple. You're able to smoke and paint. And so I'm definitely gonna have some interest in commenting on hospitality, social equity. And then with regards to community, I am the legal redress chair for the Denver NAACP branch. And I also am a commissioner for the Denver African American Commission. Thank you all.
Great. So I think I missed a couple of people, so let me go back and then we'll also see if some of the others that we couldn't hear are available. So I think I skipped over Henny Lastly.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Henny Lastly. I am one of the co-founders and executive director of an organization called Smart Colorado. We are a Denver-based nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We formed after the passage of Amendment 64 when it was time to make sure that Colorado youth, including Denver kids, had a voice at the table when it came to making policy as we started commercialization of marijuana. I've worked with many of you in the past and look forward to productive conversations specifically around making sure that kids are protected when it comes to the possibility of delivery and the possibility of hospitality. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. And now we have Clarissa Creek.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Clarissa Creek. I'm the Director of Business Development for the National Cannabis Industry Association, or NCIA. NCIA represents nearly 2,000 member companies in this country today, and we're absolutely very committed to social equity and diversity in our space. Recognizing some of these challenges, we have launched an initiative recently to set best practices for our businesses based on some of these policy conversations as well. So I'm looking forward to learning from you all, as well as contributing in any one way that I possibly can. I've also volunteered along art in the National Expungement Week efforts last couple of years. So I'm very excited to see a lot of you again, and I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you. And Jason Moore also from the Denver City Attorney's Office.
Hey everybody, I'm Jason Moore. I'm in the City Attorney's Office and Municipal Operations. A lot of the work I've been doing since I've been here has been with Division of Small Business Opportunities, so digging into equity issues and city contracting. And so the issues coming up with marijuana has presented some new opportunities to take advantage of some innovations in equity. So I was very happy to be asked to assist with the work group and with some excise and licenses, other issues.
All right, great. And then I think I did see Diane Cooks jump on. Diane, are you there?
Yes.
Hi, Diane. Do you want to just introduce yourself?
Okay, my name is Diane Cooks, and I'm the director of FAVA, Families Against Violent Acts. And we are a support group. We're an organization with a support group that works with families that has been affected by violent crime, families who have loved ones that are incarcerated, accused of a violent crime. Then our early focus of our organization was to provide bereavement support to our families, but those affected by homicide. But as we start growing and getting bigger, what we do, we provide counseling and referral service to those families affected by violence and abuse.
Great, thank you. And then we'll try to go back to you, John. It looks like you're off mute. And can we hear you at all?
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Okay, well, great. I'm John Bailey with the Black Cannabis Equity Initiative. I am one of those people who was there in the war on drugs and have a lot to do with why some of this regulation and public policy has unfolded the way it has. Knowing that we might have this type of conversation, I sort of sent everybody a little bit of information by email on the Black Cannabis Equity Initiative so that we could save at least some time from my perspective. If you want to get a little bit more, you can visit our website. I guide you particularly towards our website as it relates to our report card, where on social equity, we will be looking closely at being able to rate industry leaders as they go about trying to engage communities of color as well as the Black community, specifically around social equity. So, having said that, I'm a thought partner and a conscious of this group, and looking forward to the conversation on an ongoing basis, as well as working diligently with all of you. Having said that, I thank you for your time and look forward to the ongoing conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody. Is there anybody out there that I happened to miss and didn't get a chance to introduce themselves? All right. So I'm going to try to share my screen now, and we'll go through a couple of slides to just kind of get started and lay the ground rules and things like that. And then we'll jump into the agenda as quickly as we can. So just a reminder that everybody who's on the phone, when you're not speaking, if you can mute your microphone, that's really helpful. So let's see if I can figure this out.
I've shared your PowerPoint presentation, Molly, so it's
okay.
There.
Okay, and is it, okay, great. So this first slide is just a roadmap of the agenda topics that we're going to try to cover, as well as the dates of each of the work group meetings. So obviously today's, we're going to be talking about marijuana delivery licensing and the program itself. The next meeting is scheduled for May 28th. All of these are currently scheduled for from 1 to 3:30 p.m. The next one is May 28th, and we're going to be speaking then about the marijuana hospitality and sales program and the licensing of that. On June 11th, we're going to get into some equity discussions for all different types of marijuana licenses, so including the delivery and hospitality licenses that we talk about today and on the 28th, but also the other types of marijuana licenses that we already issue, which are, stores, cultivation facilities, manufacturing facilities, transporters, and testing facilities. And then on the 25th of June, we'll kind of try to wrap things up. There'll probably be some miscellaneous topics that we'll want to revisit from the first 3 sessions, as well as just some other miscellaneous topics that have kind of come up over the years and things we'd like to take this opportunity to get your input on. All meetings are currently scheduled to be held through this platform, which is Microsoft Teams Live, unless for some reason we indicate otherwise. So I believe we have sent out the meeting invitations for all of those, and all 4 of the links for the public viewing are also on our website under the Marijuana Laws, Rules, and Regulations page at Denver.gov. Just to lay some ground rules and just restate the purpose of what this marijuana licensing work group is going to do. So we're going to review, discuss, and make recommendations on policy direction and possible licensing laws, rules, and regulations. As a reminder, and I think Ashley touched on this in the beginning, this work group is advisory in nature. We're going to review and discuss these regulatory topics and provide comments, and then we'll incorporate them and take it as much as we can, or take that feedback and incorporate it into a future proposal for adoption. Any changes that come out of this, any ideas that move forward and require an ordinance will require Denver City Council approval. So this is really just the first step. And as Ashley said, it's not a requirement by law. It is just something that it's a best practice that we have established in order to be able to take all that public comment and feedback from a variety of different stakeholders. But it will move forward through another formal process through ordinance changes, and those do require City Council approval. Each member of the marijuana licensing work group is an equal participant and has opportunity to voice opinions and contribute ideas. We want to make sure that we hear from everybody, and everybody has diverse perspectives and diverse backgrounds, and a different way of viewing the topics and the issues. And so we want to make sure that we hear from everybody as much as we can. And we'll use everybody's input to develop that proposal to bring forward to the mayor and to City Council. We ask that we send out some information with corresponding resources and corresponding information about the topics that we're going to be discussing today. And we'll do that regularly, hopefully within a week or so in advance of the meeting. And we just ask that you try to come prepared for the discussions and have that background context. Like Ashley said, it might not always be your background or your subject matter that you have expertise in. So you don't necessarily feel like you have to learn the entire topic, but we do want to just make sure that we're prepared for these discussions. And then, as I fully expect, I know we'll all treat each other with respect and civility and courtesy. Like I said, we have diverse perspectives on a lot of these topics. Some of them may get sensitive, but we just want to make sure that we're always able to give each other that respect and professionalism throughout the work group. How the meeting format is going to be laid out is we will be presenting some background information and then we'll be posing some questions for discussion. So as you saw, if you've looked through the presentation, we tried to just kind of denote in the presentation what those discussion questions were going to be, to call them out easily so that gives you an opportunity, if you're preparing or looking through the presentation ahead of time, it gives you the opportunity to think about what the questions are and what your input might want to be. Any suggestions and questions that we have in here are purely provided for the purpose of initiating and guiding the discussion. They are not proposals that we're making, that we're just putting ideas out there to take your initial input and guide our direction. You are also very welcome to make suggestions in addition to what the questions that we've already put out here. If there is a key question that you think is missing, that we don't have on the agenda, feel free to contact us ahead of the meeting and we can add it to the presentation and the agenda, or feel free to bring it up during the meeting as well. But what we have here is not all inclusive, it's just a start to guide the discussion. As I stated, you'll be provided with a list of topics to discuss in advance of the meeting, as well as we'll be providing corresponding resources, perhaps data, studies, that type of thing, in advance of the meeting as well. Additionally, you're welcome to submit additional written comments following the meeting, either between now and the next meeting or at the completion of the work group. It's totally up to you how you'd like to do that, but this doesn't have to be your only opportunity for input either. We'll be posting the minutes from each meeting within 1 week of the meeting on the same website where we post the links to the public, as well as written comments that we receive as a result of these meetings. We're going to try to keep these work groups as conversational and as much as like we would have done if we were in person and we were in a room all together. And so we're going to present these questions and we're going to try to keep them open and free-flowing conversation. So feel free to speak up and jump in if you have some input that you want to provide or a question that you would like to ask. Because of the virtual, did somebody have something?
Yeah, on the work group members, is there going to be a chairperson, for example, or will the staff guide the work? Secondarily, is there a budget for this work, or a budget for the social equity work that's being done, so that we get a sense of kind of how big do we have to deep down to be helpful?
Yeah, so Ashley and I are the co-chairs of the committee, and then we have several staff members that are assisting with us. So if there's a question or something that you'd like to get to us, reach out to either Ashley or myself or one of the staff members, Bia, Erica, Ashley, or Joey. I'm sorry, Abby or Joey, and we can definitely work with you on anything like that. In response to your question around budget, so we're just starting our 2021 budget process right now. As you know, with everything COVID related, there's just a lot of uncertainty around where our budget is right now in 2020, as well as going into 2021. But this timing of this work groups gives us a good opportunity to look forward, given that we'll be completing this work before the 2021 budget process is complete. So if we have some programmatic direction by them, we can make the appropriate asks for the 2021 budget.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So that was great. Thanks for jumping in. I think that was John. just if you are jumping in like that, please just try to announce your name at the beginning of your statement or question, and that way we kind of know who's talking. And then that also helps the person that's operating the camera an opportunity to put you up on camera as well. And then if you don't feel like you are given an opportunity to speak, or you don't want, you're trying to jump in and you're just not getting that opportunity, go ahead and put in the chat stating that you have a question, and we'll kind of queue you up. We do ask that we only use the chat for that purpose, and for other limited purposes, like when Erica shared the link to the public meeting. But we just don't want to avoid distraction of the presenters and the work group members with a bunch of side conversations occurring in the chat. So please limit that use for that purpose. For the public input, it looks like we have over 60 people viewing the meeting right now. These meetings are open to the public and can be viewed on Microsoft Teams Live via a public link that we've posted on our website. They'll be posted in at least one day prior to the meeting, although I think those links for the rest of the meetings are already on our website. So unless anything changes, that's where those links will be. Attendees and members of the public are able to submit written comments to marijuanainfo@denvergov.org. That's right there on the bottom of that slide. And all written comments that we receive will be shared with work group members via email. To the viewing public, if you would like to provide written comments following today's meeting, that's the email address that you would use. But just be aware that they will be provided to the work group members following the meeting, but once you submit them as well. And as one last reminder, there will be a separate public process that is part of the legislative process. If anything moves through to as a proposal to City Council, there's a committee process that provides for public comment, as well as the process at the City Council hearings, or I'm sorry, the City Council meetings. So this is, again, not the last opportunity to provide input. And we are always here for one-on-ones or meetings, or if you just want to reach out individually to anybody on our team, we're happy to take your comments that way as well. Just to quickly run through some of the goals for implementation, kind of the three bubbles on the outside. First, we want to consider what thoughtful and responsible implementation looks like. Our first question for most of these topics is going to be whether we should be opting in. So you saw for this first delivery conversation, we're going to be asking and discussing whether we should be opting into a marijuana delivery program. And once we have that conversation, then we just want to think through what thoughtful and responsible implementation looks like. We want to make sure that that implementation meets the needs of our residents, businesses, and visitors. And we want to ensure the health, safety, and well-being of our city. And while we're doing all of that, we want to make sure that we're looking at all of those considerations with an equity lens. And so that'll likely be the center of our conversation, and we'll just kind of always be returning back to, as we're having these discussions, making sure that we're all thinking about that context and that question with the context of equity. And so with that, I'm going to hand this over to Michelle Garcia to kind of talk through a little bit of some of the work the city has already been doing around social equity and innovation.
Hi, thank you. So the mayor has prioritized equity in his final term. It's the guiding star of the third term. And we want to use an equity lens in really all the policies we bring forth. So what that means is that we pause to really take a very close look at how different groups will be impacted by different policies. And that means looking by neighborhood, by looking by demographic, looking by age, looking by any different identity characteristics. And then how can we acknowledge these inequalities in access and opportunity, and then develop policies and programs to make things more equitable for all residents. So during this work group, we want you to think about and share your ideas about how certain licensing decisions may impact certain demographics, as well as creative ideas for practical and sustainable solutions. So what is equity? We use definitions from the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. They are a national network of over 100 different municipalities throughout the United States committed to fostering racial equity in their city space, governmentally, and also in the city itself. The way that they define equity is that race and other characteristics of identity can no longer be used to predict life outcomes and outcomes for all groups or groups. Right now, we exist in a state of inequity, not only in the cannabis space, but generally, where race and other characteristics of identity can be used to predict life outcomes. We see this disproportionality in all types of spheres, from education, jobs, criminal justice, and again, why we're here today. So what are some context-specific examples of equity? Well, some of our sort of national partners have developed definitions of equity for the different areas in which they work. So Dane County, which is in Wisconsin, they have a contracting equity statement that reads, investments in contracting, consulting, and procurement should benefit communities Dane County serves proportionate to the demographics of Dane County. Workforce equity, the workforce of Dane County government reflects the diversity of Dane County residents, including across the breadth, functions, and departments, and depth hierarchy of the Dane County government. And then the the San Francisco office of Cannabis Equity. They have their equity statement for their program is that this program aims to foster equitable participation in the cannabis industry and create business opportunity for those negatively impacted by the war on drugs. Likewise, in Los Angeles, the social equity program is defined to promote equitable ownership and employment opportunities in the cannabis industry in order to decrease disparities in life outcomes for marginalized communities and to address the disproportionate impacts of the war on drugs in those.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. So one last slide before we jump into the meat of the program, and which is just one, taking all of that into context around creating an equitable marijuana licensing program. We just want to make sure we're having the conversation about how we implement these provisions that are equitable, meaningful, and sustainable. And so to put some thought around that, we just put some considerations and questions down here. We'll really get into this a lot more during the third meeting when we're having that equity focused conversation. But again, it's going to be spread throughout all of these conversations. And so we just want to place this, kind of frame this and set the groundwork for you all now so that this is in the front of your minds. And then, as we're moving through these questions around delivery and hospitality, we just want this to be at the forefront of your minds. And so when it comes to different considerations, we want to talk about short-term and long-term objectives. So for example, some short-term objectives would be, we hear that the importance around getting some of these new licenses like delivery up and running. And we agree that, this is something that we would want to do efficiently and be expeditious about, but then at the same time, some long-term objectives would be that we want to make sure we are creating pathways to ownership for applicants who may meet those equity criteria. And so just thinking through both of those and trying to balance that. The next consideration is legal challenges. And so we have seen some examples from across the country where equity programs have presented some legal challenges, which sometimes result in either financial burdens or licensing delays. And so we just want to make sure that as we're coming up with our program, that we have that and that we're aware of those challenges that might actually be counterproductive to the program that we're trying to develop. And so some of the legal challenges that we've seen from other cities are both on the process side as well as on the programmatic side. And so we just want to make sure that we're thinking through all of those different unintended consequences. And same thing from operational challenges. We want to make sure that any program that we implement, we're able to operationalize. And then some of the questions that we'll be thinking about, or just that we kind of want to be aware of, is what can we learn from other cities and states? What are we seeing as far as what they have done successfully, and what are some challenges that they've met that we don't want to recreate? And then how can we engage with state and industry partners in creating a successful program? For example, Is there something we can be doing to incentivize the relationships with the existing marijuana industry and in the minority-owned business spaces? And then finally, what does success look like? What are our goals? How will we measure it? How will we know that we have successfully implemented this type of program? So those are just some of the considerations and questions we want you all to be thinking about as we're having some of these conversations. We'll stop there before we jump into everything and see if anybody has any questions on that first part. One thing that I did forget to mention at the beginning is that this is scheduled for a 2.5-hour meeting, so we will try to take a break at some point. Maybe just kind of give everybody 5 minutes to kind of step away, get some water, take a break. And so we'll probably try to do that in about maybe 20-25 minutes. But for now, we'll kind of get going on some of these agenda topics, if that's okay. So, but any questions from the first part yet?
Molly, this is Councilwoman Sedabaka. I do have a question.
Sure.
Do you all plan to do an overview of the current context as far as what you know about licensees, placement, disproportionate concentration? Do you have a plan to address all of that, just to give the people who don't know the context fully a deeper understanding?
Yes, great question. So we do plan to give that context. We are, if on the information that we sent out with for the first agenda, we did send a link to some new data that we just received, or that I believe the Marijuana Enforcement Division just released publicly in February, around some of the demographic information of their occupational licensees, and it's from 2018, which is the only time that they collected that information in a full year. So that information is available to provide some of that context, and we will be providing additional information leading into that conversation, that equity conversation for that first June meeting. We contracted with the vendor this year for a study along the similar information of what has been released by the MED, and so we'll have that information. And we can also provide other data. I think you mentioned placement or location of the businesses, so we can provide some of that information going forward as well.
Yeah, and I think that going beyond the links, it would be helpful for you to break it down visually and verbally the way that we're doing here, especially since these are public meetings and going out in a visual format. Also, who is the contractor you all selected to do the equity study?
So the vendors, the company is called Analytic Insight.
Awesome. And do they have minority representation leading their business?
I'd have to go back and I'm not sure, actually.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay. So anybody else have questions before we jump into the first question?
Yeah, I do, Molly. John Bailey, real quick. I'm not sure, but I think the Councilwoman's question was also related to the number of, she mentioned in her remarks, the number of applicants or the number of licenses that were in District 9. Councilwoman, was your question also related to being able to?
I mean, that's definitely information that.
No, I was going somewhere. Are we also asking for a list of who all of the licensees are in respective districts around the city, and if not around the city, then in her district where there seems to be a high concentration of owner-operators? Can we get that information?
So the information that we have from the MED doesn't give geographic location. It just gives information from the 2008 occupational license applications, but it doesn't identify where those people worked at that time as far as like geographic location of the business they were working for, anything like that. And nor does the data that we collected, for our survey or our study that we did this year, everything was conducted through a survey. And so we'd have to kind of go back and look at the raw data to see if we asked where they work, but it was a broader survey, and we didn't get into that level of detail. I mean, we asked for some of that information, and I guess I would try to, before we go too deep on this conversation, I would like to be able to share this information with you so that we're, you know, all talking about it with the same context.
Okay, I'll hold.
And this is actually, Molly, I think too, if John, if I'm hearing you right, your question is, who are the businesses who are located in District 9? And that is public record. Is that your question, John?
Well, it was, because the councilwoman said that there were over 200 owner-operators in her area. If there is a cap somewhere in this discussion, then it would be nice to know who are the dispensaries in that area, since she said also that very few of those are black or brown. So if we're going to have a social equity questions and we're going to look at barriers or gaps, it'd be nice to know where there are some gaps, and that may be a boilerplate to be able to look at her area in terms of being able to make some social equity regulations, recommendations, or suggestions in a good constructive social dialogue going forward.
And I think, Molly, all of that is public information, and we have it up on our website already. But we can pull that together for another meeting so we could look at it all holistically.
No problem. I appreciate that.
Okay. So if we're ready, then we'll jump into the first conversation topic. So let me go back to sharing my screen if I can. Always get a little scared every time I do this.
Motley, this is Art. Can I ask a quick question or make a statement?
Please, yes.
I believe the MED is under a duty now to collect data on license denials. Sean Coleman may have more information on that, but that could be something that if they have any information before this work group is over, that may benefit us as well. So maybe contact them and ask them about that.
Okay, that's great. So we will definitely reach out to the MED, and maybe even since that'll be the benefit of having Ian on our work group as well. Okay, so let's see, I jumped to the back of the beginning, so let me hop ahead real quick. Oops. Okay, so marijuana delivery, just a quick couple of things around some background around marijuana delivery. This bill, House Bill 19-1234, passed just in the legislative session last year. It allows the state to begin issuing permits for medical marijuana delivery on January 2nd of 2020, so this year, and then also begin issuing permits for retail marijuana delivery starting January of next year, 2021. Delivery of regulated marijuana is not permitted in any municipality unless the municipality has an ordinance or resolution that allows the delivery of regulated marijuana. That is in the statute, and each city has the option to allow or prohibit delivery. So hence this conversation and our first question, which is, should we allow for delivery of marijuana in Denver? The state delivery permit for marijuana is an endorsement to an existing state marijuana store license or transporter license. So only licensed stores or licensed transporters may apply for a state delivery permit. So we just wanted to give a little bit of context for those types of businesses that we have operating in Denver that would be able to apply for a state delivery permit. So for marijuana centers, and medical centers and retail stores, we have 332 licenses that are operating out of 207 locations across the city. For transporters, we have 8 licenses. Some of them may or may not have a licensed premise, a physical licensed premise, and so we just put the licenses rather than the locations. And then finally, off-premise storage facilities are a location where a delivery business may be able to store and transport and kind of package for delivery. And so we just wanted to put that out there as well as far as how many of those we have in Denver, which happens to be 0, but we do have 1 pending application currently. I would guess that if we opted into delivery, we would see that number change as an option for delivery businesses to utilize a facility like that. The first question, and I'll just put this up here for a second, and then we'll take it down to be able to have the conversation, but just want to open it up to the group about whether Denver should opt into marijuana delivery, and thinking through some of those broader considerations when we're having this discussion are the current concentration of marijuana outlets and where they're located and how many we have. As I just said, we have 207 locations. Public safety considerations, public health considerations, underage access, patient access, revenue impacts to both the business and the city, opportunities for new market entrants. So looking at what types of opportunities this would provide for new entrants into the market, and then customer convenience. So I'll stop there and see who would like to start our conversation. Don't be shy.
So can you tell us?
Oh, I think I heard Michelle. If you want to hop in, I heard Michelle first.
Yes, hi, this is Michelle Helene, Denver Public Schools. I just have a clarifying question.
Yeah.
Are we looking at opt-in for both medicinal and recreational? Or are we looking first at medicinal and then later recreational?
So that's a good question, and it's actually on the next slide, and it's a conversation that we can have. I mean, there's options when it comes to that, right? Like, we can't opt into retail, or we can't start retail until January of next year, but we can have the conversation around, should we launch them both? Should we opt into both? And if so, should we launch them both at the same time? Should there be a different start times? And what are the different kind of considerations when you're thinking about those options?
Thank you.
Hi, this is Jessica Scardita with Vicente Cedarburg.
Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think, especially in light of the fact that we're currently in the midst of a global pandemic, it's especially important to consider how delivery can assist medical patients in their access to important products. So both the governor and the mayor have already determined that marijuana establishments are essential businesses. So I think the question now is, how do we ensure that patients and consumers can safely access these products? I think delivery gives us an avenue to do that. And so I definitely support the city opting in.
Is there, Molly, this is Councilwoman Sedebaca. I'm concerned about opening up that option without first teasing out what went wrong with our licensing to begin with. And so I wonder if there's a possibility for us to take an approach like Oakland did when they legalized marijuana, and they made all of their first licenses available to people of color who were criminalized by the war on drugs. I think that would make a lot of sense here. And I think that attaching it to the dispensaries might make it more challenging for our marginalized communities to access those licenses. So I'm wondering if there's a way to not have it tied to a particular dispensary, and to also be available primarily to people who have been excluded from this sector to begin with. Have we explored models elsewhere?
Anshul, if you are comfortable with answering that question, I mean, I think the state statute does limit us to be only only a dispensary or store or a transporter would be able to get a delivery permit. And so and that is a question that we have later on in one of the slides as well, as far as should we allow both stores and centers and transporters be able to apply for these permits. I have that correct, right, Anshul?
Yeah, this is Anshul. That's right, Molly. The state statute says that existing medical marijuana stores is what they call them, and retail marijuana stores, and then transporters can get the delivery permit.
So what if it was possible for the city to set up their own business that is a collective that would be eligible under the state laws to get those licenses, and that collective is then a collective of the licensees that are delivery people?
Hi, this is Jackie Flug from Drizzly. Just to give some context to the Councilwoman's question, what the state of Massachusetts did for the transporter license that you have, they have made those that the only people who are eligible for those licenses for the first 2 years are social equity applicants, people who can meet their standards to show that they were impacted negatively by the war on drugs. The thought behind this is that these are the businesses that are more readily capitalized and easier to get started and more accessible for people in social equity groups. And then they even made that if the 2-year period wasn't sufficient for enough people to apply, they could always have the discretion to extend that period, so that these transporter licenses are solely for people for social equity groups at this time.
This is Chris Hines, Denver City Council. May I?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, great. So I in some ways I want to echo Councilmember Sedavaca's points about equity, and also extend what Vicente Cederberg said as well. The city of Denver has 10,660 medical cannabis patients in the city and county, and so it's a very small subset of the people who use cannabis. Most of the people use it recreationally in the city of Denver, but the people who are currently, because Denver has both recreational and medical cannabis, the people who are still under red cards in the city of Denver are in many times part of our underserved community. They might not necessarily be Black or brown, but they might be disadvantaged in other ways, like have disabilities, because you have to have a medical reason for a red card. And so like muscle spasms, severe pain, PTSD, autism spectrum. I'm just looking at the registry program from the state. And so in some ways, first of all, it's a small population relative to the full population. Second, I think transporters aren't allowed until 2021. But third, I think that that in many ways we owe it to these folks who are already under a lot of stress and pain. We're under a pandemic and a lockdown, and allowing delivery sooner would help the people who are already have been medically cleared by a medical professional to need cannabis for their treatment. Thank you.
If I can jump in, this is Sean Coleman. If this is a good time for me to jump in, I have a couple of thoughts.
Please, yep.
I think that we are going to be somewhat limited to what the current statutes say for some period of time, because as we know, the legislature is temporarily adjourned until the 25th. And when they come back, I think they're going to have a tremendous amount of work to do with, the budgetary situation the state finds itself in. I do think that within the context of what the current statutes say with respect to delivery, hospitality, accelerated, all the current license types, I just find that the current law, and within the current law, delivery is the least opportune for the equity discussion, because the current law just requires that you first have either a dispensary or a transporter business, which in either case is a capital intensive thing for, as the council member just described, until next year by virtue of the state law, which we cannot change at the present moment, is to a very limited population. And again, a population that by and large is already occupied, because being by virtue of being medical patients are probably associated with a dispensary. So I think that it's when I balance that with the current need for particularly the people who are immunocompromised or other people in the patient community for whom delivery might literally be a lifesaver. I just feel that when I think about the policy, the constraints of the current law, the current public health reality that we find ourselves in, that I would personally encourage that we move forward with delivery for medical is what the law allows, and then focus our equity conversation on the other license types, where we have a much greater ability of flexibility because, again, the practical reality of the delivery license class is that it requires a dispensary, which, if we're talking about new market entrance, requires for a city to first have a new dispensary license to begin with. So it's very complex, very capital intensive. It's not quite the same delivery program that we find in other states like California or Massachusetts, where there's a lower capital input to participate. So I think when I balance that with the pressing needs for the patient community, I would strongly encourage that we focus on other areas for equity, allow the patient community to access delivery. It gives the city and the industry opportunity to make a trial run of the safety aspects with a small population base. And it doesn't preclude by any means a discussion about delivery in a broader context if the underlying state law changes in the future. But I just think that for the purposes of our time here, ensuring that the program benefits the patient community, because that's who it's for at present, is going to be a better use of our time, and focusing on equity within the lens of hospitality, and the lens of new dispensary licenses, if that becomes a conversation, and most importantly, obviously, within the accelerated program, because it's there already. I think that's going to be a better use of our time.
And with all due respect, Sean, you're a lobbyist whose interests are the businesses that you currently contract with. And some of us here have interests that are community members who are not part of this industry yet. And so equity has to cross all of our conversations at this point, as far as how we use our time. Thank you.
And this is Sarah Woodson. I just would like
I appreciate that. No, I just really appreciate the opportunity to clarify that. I'm obviously serving on this committee, and my capacity as just myself, I'm not representing any client on this committee. So I'm really speaking from my perspective of my expertise in these policy areas and understanding what the constraints of the current state law is. And again, I absolutely think that that equity should be a primary part of the conversation of license types where it makes more sense, specifically hospitality and new dispensaries and accelerated license program. But again, with keeping in mind that I'm speaking as myself, with this just based on my policy expertise and information, which is why I was selected for the committee, not representing any interest, that I really strongly believe from where we are in terms of the actual state law as it exists and what the opportunities lie in terms of how the industry really works, that delivery is the least viable opportunity because of the inherent capital costs associated with that owning dispensary, and the opportunities in accelerated program and hospitality are just simply much more viable, and really looking forward to really diving into those conversations. But that's just where those ideas coming from.
Okay, so Sarah, I think you were about to jump in.
Yeah, thank you. So several things. First and foremost, equity absolutely has to be a part of the delivery discussion. What you're saying, Sean, is absolutely correct. The way that it's currently written, when it comes to year one with medical, there's absolutely no real opportunity for social equity in there. What I think that we need to be discussing, and first of all, Molly, the question was, should we allow delivery in Denver? And so for the color of cannabis, that is something that we support, absolutely. What I think that if we're having conversation regarding how we move forward with new license types and new opportunities with an equity lens, we can talk about patient access, but in conjunction with talking about patient access, we also need to focus on when delivery is viable for social equity, which will be in 2021. How does that look? What type of set-asides will be given? Throughout this work group, you will continue to hear me say one-for-ones. We believe that that is a fair and just way to go about issuing new permits in 2021. And then in addition, through industry conversations with people that are in the industry, not all industry people will be doing delivery in-house. So if they're planning on hiring a transporter, you definitely want to make some concessions for a social equity transporter. I also want to say that we have to stop having conversation where we say that delivery is a low-hanging fruit, but then we come back and say, well, it's $250,000 or $300,000 to open a delivery business, and there's no way that a social equity person can do that. And so when we talk about these things, we have to look at equity through the whole lens, but we also have to take into consideration patient access and the business in general. And so those are some of the things I think we need to take into consideration when we're having these conversations. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump in real quick and see if we can kind of move to the next question. I know that a lot of the questions that we're going to pose are really kind of dependent on the answers and what we kind of come up with some of the other discussion questions. And so, I mean, I know we can't say, yes, we want to opt into delivery, or somebody has an opinion that, yes, they want to opt into delivery without knowing what a delivery program might look like. So let me just ask this one final question before we move on. Is there anybody on the work group that would like to put in, kind of state their opinion that they would prefer that we not opt into delivery? I know that depends on what a program might look like, and that we could still say no later on down the road, but at this first stage, anybody want to oppose it from the very beginning?
Well, Sarah, not Sarah, but Molly, John Bailey here. That question has to be couched then with pros and cons.
Right.
I mean, we need to be able to see what are the pros of that decision and the cons of that decision, as well as the opposite pros and cons, because that would give us not a total picture, but it would close some of the gaps in terms of thoughts about this particular subject matter relative to everybody not being on the same page.
Okay. So I'll move on to the next question, and then we can, keep coming back to this question too. This is not your last chance to make your case here. But to move on to the next one, then if this kind of gets to, I think it was Michelle asked this question around scaling and sequencing, but if Denver allows for marijuana delivery, should it include retail delivery, medical marijuana delivery, or both? And what should some of that timing and sequencing look like? And so as I let you know before, the state began issuing permits for medical marijuana in January of this year, and will begin issuing permits for retail marijuana next year, which includes the transporter piece as well. And so as a couple of people have noted, stores and centers will be able to deliver. Denver has a cap for marijuana business stores and centers right now. And so, that'll be part of our conversation as a part of this work group as well. But looking at this piece right now, transporters would come into the picture for somebody that beyond a store and center that would be able to deliver, that would come into the picture in 2021 per state statute. Other considerations would be the public health, patient access, as Councilman Hines mentioned, an additional revenue stream, again, that goes to both the city and the business itself, opportunities for new market entrants, and customer convenience. So a lot of the same topics that we just talked about, but just kind of want to put that out there one more time. And as a reminder, as you're jumping in to say something, please remember to introduce yourself and just state your name before you begin speaking.
Molly, this is Michelle Helene with Denver Public Schools.
Yeah.
And the reason I was interested in that question as to whether or not the city has the option of looking at just medicinal or just recreational. I think some really valid points have been raised about medicinal. I think from a perspective of an entity that works with youth and their families, I think the concern for recreational comes from a couple different points. I know right now we're looking at no contact delivery in the state of this pandemic and kind of this new normal. And I've read things online about people having alcohol deliveries that literally just show up on their door that you don't have to sign for and you don't have to show an ID. So I do have some concerns about access and who's going to be receiving these deliveries. I think my other concern about recreational is we just recently got access to our 2019 district Healthy Kids Colorado data. And while I can't share specifics yet because it hasn't been publicly released, we are seeing some concerning data points related to youth marijuana use. So I think anything that could potentially increase access, I think is very concerning from, again, the perspective of working with youth and their families.
Can I say something, Molly?
Yes, please.
This is Ian in the governor's office, and I just want to be very clear that delivery and hospitality still have some very specific guidelines in terms of access, in terms of who has the ability to receive this. I understand and recognize that there is a clear difference between delivering alcohol and delivering cannabis. There are far more guidelines for delivering cannabis as have currently been outlined than there are for alcohol in regards to ID checks and verification and requirements that are incumbent upon the business that have strict penalties, including loss of license. And so this is outside of Denver's purview. The state will be taking a very firm stance on overall compliance, just as they do within regulated businesses. And I want to be clear that compliance within regulated marijuana businesses is far, far higher than it is for alcohol. It's above 99%. And we expect that to continue with this type of additional opportunities to increase access on both the medical and retail side.
This is Chris Hines, Denver City Council.
Go ahead. Okay, great. So I think alcohol delivery and cannabis, just to extend slightly what was just said, there have to be ID checks. Like with, as I understand it, with alcohol you can kind of drop and go, but with cannabis there has to be an ID check. There's social distancing here with COVID, but there is definitely an ID check, and you can even get like fentanyl. You can get Schedule II narcotics, through the mail, and cannabis you cannot, as I understand it. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that just to again provide support, it's the checks are way stronger than for alcohol. They're even stronger than for some of the Schedule II narcotics that we get that are also available by prescription through their medical professional. Thank you.
Hi, this is Jackie Fluke from Drizzly. Can I jump in for a moment since alcohol seems to be the topic? And I want to be very clear for everybody's edification. There are several ways that alcohol can be delivered in the state of Colorado. One is from your local retailer, which definitely requires a face-to-face interaction and ID check. There's an additional way, which I think you're referring to, which appears to be more problematic, is when a consumer is buying from, say, a winery, and there's a package coming from a UPS or a FedEx, that I'm not trying to put down my common carrier colleagues here, but I think that is what you are referring to in things being left. I think Colorado retailers are very serious about the interactions and the responsibilities they have with their license, and you also have a very active enforcement unit in your LED there. What I'd say about cannabis is that, number one, it's not coming through the mail through common carriers. You're talking about it coming from either a transporter or the retailer, which is, again, a more face-to-face licensee that is responsible to your regulators. But I think it's also important to mention that we're not simply inventing delivery. Marijuana delivery is happening right now in every jurisdiction, and the jurisdictions that are serious about bringing people from the illegal market into the legal regulated market are opting for delivery as the only way. As a former prosecutor, I can tell you the people who were getting arrested for their marijuana purchases aren't the people who were getting delivery. Those people are in the more affluent sections where it's discreet, and those neighborhoods aren't as highly policed as the other people who cannot do the delivery. So I think if you really want to be serious about ending your illegal market, you have to opt for delivery as a legal means.
Thank you.
This is
Anybody
Truman.
else want to chime in? Anybody that we haven't heard from quite as much, maybe?
This is Truman, Marijuana Industry Group Executive Director. I'm just not hearing a ton of opposition in this group to delivery as a concept in general. So I'm not really going to speak too much to it. I guess I'll say delivery is the future of everything. We know that COVID is only accelerating that. And so for me, it's kind of a no-brainer that Denver should do delivery. And that's not just in my role as executive director of MIG. That's as somebody who, doesn't really want to go to the store right now because it's kind of scary. I get everything delivered right now. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I guess in terms of the questions that were posed in the PowerPoint, I would suggest that Denver, if they have the bandwidth, consider rolling out medical delivery now because it's legal under the state guidelines. But you know, MIG recognizes that we're in a pandemic, you know, budgets for everything just, you know, the bottom fell out, right? And so we understand that there may be other concerns that the city needs to deal with that frankly take priority. And that's hard to say as somebody who's been a champion for medical patients for over a decade. But we just want to be respectful that you guys have a lot on your plate.
So
when it comes, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, let me ask this kind of follow-up question to that, which is, you know, timing-wise, it's May right now. Depending on when we're able to get medical out, the timing for both medical and retail could look pretty similar, given that retail is going to be allowed in about 6 months here. Is there any benefit or any argument for staggering them in any way? Or do we want to be would you all recommend having them both ready as quickly as they possibly could, which would be January for retail, as soon as possible on medical?
Well, just jump in. You're talking about bringing them out simultaneously, right?
Well, I mean, I guess that's the question that I'm asking. Is there any benefit to, even if retail is going to be allowed in January, is there any benefit to giving medical a head start, or is there a benefit to starting them both at the same time? That's my question.
So the situation, if the premise is that we are essential, and the premise is that we have folks who are saying that we need this, then we're talking about really emergency delivery, you know, within a time frame. And if we're talking about sort of trying to do something immediately, then I'm agreeing with Candy and Sarah and several others. There ought to be some social equity considerations that have to be put in place, because the only players who can take part right now are the ones who are early entry. And so if you're not an early entry, then you can't even partake in either one of these, whether it's now with medical and later with recreation, or having them both come out at the same time. Unless we're going to look at whether or not there have been some revoked licenses that social equity might be able to take a look at within a time frame from here to January.
And I would also just frame Head Start as privilege, and we are the same people, the same lobbyists that protected having this license attached to a company are the same people who put up the barriers for entry for the people who are excluded now. And so I don't think it's fair to give a head start to anybody without considering and clearly identifying what our social equity applicants are, what is temporary and only useful now in an emergency, who has to start all over when everybody's allowed in. I think we have to get very clear on what equity means to us before we give anybody a head start, especially if it's not the marginalized groups that we're giving the head start to.
If I might, Molly, if I might.
Right after you, John, we've got Sarah Bellstock that has something, okay, and then Councilwoman Black. But go ahead and finish, John.
Well, I think that because we are 7 years and $8 billion late, there has to be those types of considerations, or we're not being authentic. One of the things that we did from the very beginning with the legislation is we said who couldn't be. So that was social exclusion. At the same time, we talked about who couldn't be. That was also social exclusion. So at no point was there ever a really serious social equity discussion. And so now we can't put it off because of timing. We have to deal with the fact that the timing is now to be able to have this discussion, and whatever the opportunities are that are in front of us are the ones that we ought to be seriously giving considerations to.
Okay, so Sarah, you want to jump in? Sarah Bellstock?
Thank you. I would like to, and I do apologize to pivot away from the social equity conversation, because I think that that's really important. But I do want to just raise the issue, or the question really, of, you know, as we're looking at increasing access, that is something that might have some unintended consequences in terms of increasing use. And I think we just have a lot of question marks there still. So I am wondering, you know, if we are moving towards particularly allowing recreational delivery, kind of opening the door for that, I do wonder what surveillance mechanisms we put into place to make sure that we are not having unintended consequences and overburdening kind of any one group in our community, you know, be that youth, be that various adult communities. And so I'd really like to if this moves forward, I would like to understand what we're going to do to make sure that we are continuing to understand all of the impacts in terms of impacts on use, as well as kind of those secondary impacts that might exist. And I don't know if we kind of move forward quickly, if we will have an opportunity to have all of that in place.
Sarah, this is Truman from MIG.
Yep.
What,
Go ahead, sorry.
what are the, could you be a little bit more specific about the unintended consequences you're referring to? Just not quite sure I understand where you're going here.
And have you reviewed the current delivery rules, and are you familiar with the ID checks and everything that is in place currently in the law?
I am, thank you. I am also a person who has had alcohol left on my porch, but that was through a third-party delivery system, which I know would not necessarily be an issue here, but there's no reason why my 8-year-old could not have gotten to that first. That aside, I think there is some literature that as kind of states, as we have looser and looser regulations that increase different access points, that use goes up. And so I think we've seen this with alcohol. There's a wealth of literature there, and we're beginning to see it some with marijuana in terms of reviews of state policies. And again, I don't know that the goal here is to increase use, it's to increase access, it's to increase access points among those who might already be using. So I think we could see that our use rates stay around where they are, but we could also see an increase. And so I just want to make sure that we are prepared to monitor that and to really understand what the impacts are so that we can then be responsive to those.
And Molly, we have Kendra Black, Dan Pabon, and Henny Leslie on queue.
Okay, so go ahead, Councilwoman Black.
Thank you. I was originally going to say I think that we should pursue both the medical and the retail at the same time. But I'm wondering if there's a way that we could do that does consider social equity, and maybe a plan with working with some state legislators to amend the state law so that we could open it up to new equity applicants. So I don't necessarily think we should distinguish between the medical and the retail, but I'd like to have opportunities for people, and wondering if that's something that we could talk about. Thanks.
Just a quick thought, and I think a couple of these things will come up in some later slides. So to Sarah's point around surveillance and tracking and monitoring, we do have a couple of slides around safety and surveillance, and so we can get to that. And as well as your comments, Councilwoman Black, I don't know what the timing would be to amend the law before January, and then also, I think another option that we'll talk about later on in some slides is the transport. We have the option to look at both transporter license and stores and centers license. And if there were some comments that I think we heard around making it available to, if transporters were less of a barrier, then we could look at even that option of making those licenses available to transporters in Denver before we open it up to stores and centers. That's an option we could discuss as a work group. And then finally, I think, we have the opportunity as a local jurisdiction to put some parameters around what we want equity applicants to look like and how we want a program to be for new entrants into the market. And so those are things I think we don't necessarily, we have that opportunity as a local jurisdiction. But let's move on. I think we had Dan Pabon and then Henny. Oh, Dan, you're on mute. There you
Okay.
go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So one item I didn't want to get lost in the discussion was that the state, in looking at essential businesses, allowed both recreational and medical dispensaries to provide product. And the reason for that was because there's a recognition that there are patients who are not in the medical system, but still are needing of their medicine through the recreational system. And for whatever reason, they don't want to give their information over to the government. They don't want to go through the hoops and hurdles to get a medical card. So I think that is an important point when we talk about medical versus recreational delivery. I think it actually serves similar populations. So in that vein, what I would say is if we can, you know, if we put in medical as soon as possible, but not have it delay the implementation of recreational January 1st, 2021, so that all populations could be served according to the law, I think that would be most ideal. Second, I would say that, you know, this discussion is a very good discussion. It feels very much like the discussion we had in 2012, just about the different public safety pieces. How does this compare to alcohol, et cetera? And the good news is we have so much data now and so much funding, as Molly alluded to measure a lot of these different things. And I think we should continue to do that to determine how or whether we should, you know, change or modify these rules. But to Ian's earlier point, the state put in some pretty robust regulations for delivery. And if there was an interest in at least using those as the baseline for Denver's program, and then deciding what additional components needed to be added, I think that would be a good place to start. And to Molly's point, if there was a social equity piece that you could do within the bounds of the law, perhaps it is to the transporter license, but the state law is pretty prescriptive in what you can do, and trying to get that law changed, it had been introduced 5 years by the time it passed, will be difficult. I just, you know, I can't predict anything, but I'm just saying changing that law is a very carefully constructed piece of legislation. Thank you.
One suggestion, this is Truman here, is, you know, there's more than one way to use delivery as a mechanism to, you know, focus on social equity. Before COVID, I personally felt that I would like to see cities who are talking about social equity put some skin in the game financially when it comes to social equity, because a lot of the reasons why the industry is as not diverse as it used to be are those barriers to entry that were put in by the city and the state over the years. And that's not to cast aspersions on any one person, but when I started in 2009, the industry was more diverse than it is now. And, you know, just the cost of compliance, the cost of capital just kept going up, you know, licensing fees just kept mounting, and slowly and surely the folks with less access to capital who don't look like me got squeezed out. And so, you know, I realized post-COVID that, you know, that would probably be like trying to squeeze blood from a stone. But one potential option would be to add a small fee to a delivery program, and then those funds would go into some sort of social equity fund, you know, that would help either with training or offsetting licensing fees. I mean, you know, that kind of money could do a lot of good here. So I just want folks to kind of think maybe a little bit outside the box as well.
Great. And so I think we have some funding slides or some kind of revenue slides coming up. So we'll get into that as well. But let's kind of run through who we have in the queue, and then we'll move on to the next question. So right now we have Henny and then Art.
Yes, thank you so much for the conversation. From where we sit at Smart Colorado, our most important priority would be to make sure that we have strict compliance around purchases, and we have been instrumental in the conversation at the state level with respect to delivery. One of our concerns, and I just would like to make sure everyone's aware of the Healthy Kids Colorado data that was published in 2017 that indicated that 39% of youth purchased their marijuana from someone else, and there was no distinction between whether or not that was black market marijuana or if it was black market that someone had already purchased from a dispensary. We have been always very supportive of industry's compliance checks, as well as the results that have come out of that. So we appreciate all the work that goes into the licensees that make sure that compliance is upheld at the storefront level. When we have this one step removed, though, there are concerns about increased density in terms of outlet density. making sure that this doesn't impact the social norming when it comes to the way kids look at marijuana for themselves, but also for adults. And then we have to ask the question, and this is something that's been, always challenging even on the licensee side, is the looping aspect. So what's to say that one location doesn't end up getting 25 deliveries from one specific or multiple delivery services? Is there some type of, I'd be interested to hear from Denver Police if there's some conversation going on about monitoring the amount of deliveries that could perhaps go to one address. Thank you.
So we'll queue maybe Lieutenant Howard up in just a minute, but let's go with Art since he had put himself in the queue.
Yeah, I think the equity opportunity when it comes to delivery is pretty much solely around the transporter licenses. And so, I think before Denver decides to opt into the transporter license, they need to get their equity lens up and running prior to doing so. I believe when it comes to the transporter license, a lot of the equity discussion will try to mitigate the limitations of the current law. For example, transporters are responsible for the product once it's in their car, but the in-house delivery drivers are not responsible. The retail outlet is still responsible. So I think it's things like that that's going to cause for more insurance on behalf of transporters that the city may be able to help mitigate. From my reading of the law, these transporters will need video surveillance. They will need to have a tracking system, and they need to have an alarm. I don't think all that's going to cost $300,000, but if there's somebody that the city of Denver can partner with to help these transporters get these capital intensive situations up and running in their car, I think that will broadly qualify as something that's an equity lens when it comes to the transporter license. So, my general suggestion is before you issue transporter license, have your equity lens up and running before you do so.
Okay, Sarah. Yep, you're up.
Okay, thank you. First, I think, the information that you guys send out prior to these meetings are important, because when I'm hearing everyone speak, there's clearly a level of confusion with what the delivery bill is saying. So first and foremost, medical can only deliver right now. In 2021, the only retail that can happen is through the in-house dispensary or if you hire a transporter company. Currently, transporter licenses are available, and a part of some of the outreach work that we've been doing with the help of Joey Pena is getting a list of those costs. And so the cost to get an actual transporter license on a state and city level isn't really that significant. The problem becomes the costs associated to surveillance. So when we were talking about the safety aspect, I think that there really needs to be a clear understanding. There is strict surveillance requirements for a delivery company. When we talk about social equity and a transporter license, are we talking about now saying that we should move forward and only give social equity to transporters moving forward? Or are we talking about what the bill says, that you need to have that delivery permit, the store and the transporter license? And so I think that there's a huge confusion where people aren't really understanding how the program lays out. And so when you're talking about social equity, you're saying a transporter, but right now anyone can get a transporter license. When you talk about social equity, what you need to think about is first and foremost, the social equity candidate needs to build a relationship with a current retail dispensary store. And that's some of the work that we're doing, because you can have a transporter license, but if you cannot make a connection with a current store, then that's not going to work. The original question that you asked was regarding should medical and delivery come out at the same time? Our organization has taken the approach to where we would be fine with medical happening earlier, but there would have to be some type of ordinance written that, again, allows for a 1-for-1 when it comes to retail, and also allows for some type of partnership where we know that if medical happens now, we're going to have these 1-for-1s put aside on retail, and we're making these relationships with people that will deliver. So not only do they have the transporter license, not only do they have the permit, but now they've established a relationship with the dispensary. So now we're all working together in sync. So that's my comment. And just, I think it's really important that we are reading the statute and we have a clear understanding of, you know, what we're talking about as far as how the law is written. Thank you.
And we have Chris Rhines next, then Ryan Tancherin, and then Councilwoman Sidbaka.
Go ahead, Councilman.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Yeah, Councilman Chris Hines. So I'm in favor of moving quickly on delivery for medical patients. There's a distinction between medical and recreational for a reason. Medical patients have demonstrated to a medical professional that their health requires cannabis for treatment. It's a demonstrated vulnerable population. It's less than 1.5% of Denver's population. And respectfully, it's not a head start for the medical population because it's already been legal since January 1st of this year. I recognize that we're doing a head start for recreational, but medical has already been legal, and there are people who want treatment, and they could legally get it today if Denver opted in. So while we're, as I understand it, we could opt into the state bill for medical cannabis today, no fiscal note, no expense. So finally, I'd say that there's definitely cannabis delivery today from illegal transporters, and they don't perform ID checks. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go ahead and go on to Ryan, and then I think several comments that we have been made today will be addressed in the next couple of slides, and I think I just breezed right on through our break. So unless anybody has any objections, I think we'll just kind of plow ahead. We have about 40 minutes left, so it's a great conversation, and I want to keep getting through everything. So, you know, if you need to step away for a minute, we'll still be here when you get back, but we'll go ahead and plow through and go till 3:30 if we can. So, Ryan, if you want to chime in, and then we'll jump to the next slide, which I think has some of the things that Councilman Hines just brought up around revenue and cost. So, go ahead, Ryan.
Definitely. Thank you. Ryan Tatum with Cultivated Synergy. Ended up kind of echoing a little bit what Sarah and Chris kind of both said as well. I think that the whole equity conversation is obviously huge. It's something that needs to be looked at through all of these conversations over the next couple months and frankly for years moving forward. And I think there's some really good points coming up, but also from being in the industry and conversations and things, and years ago when this started, it seemed that a big focus for delivery was like what Chris mentioned, to really help those patients who need their medicine or help parents who aren't able to say get to it at a certain time, and to really just streamline that process. And so I think that there is a ton of value around the social equity in these different pieces. But kind of like what Sarah said, just my personal opinion, I mean, seeing the medical come live first, nothing would be wrong with that really, because while all these are very valid points, it does seem that when all this started a long time ago, that the medical patients were a big focus for this need. And especially seeing with the numbers that, you know, it's not quite the mass group like Chris mentioned. You're not going to be dealing with millions of people day one. That really should be an initiative that looks first, because some of the state regulations looks like the equity piece makes it a little more difficult for that. But then also a big push is to get these patients their medicine so they can live and carry on the life they want to have. And so kind of looking at those with the priority would be just a suggestion that I have. I mean, I think they're all very valid points, but you're talking about medical patient who might need something to get through their day-to-day, and you're talking about servicing somebody who just wants to have a good feeling, myself being one of those. So I think just kind of the priority of those, so the medical patients who actually need that aren't in a way waiting on hold as well while we look at unveiling this whole altogether big thing at once. You know, really get our feet wet and address those people who frankly need it. With still keeping the equity as a big piece. But as Ian and other people have brought up, it does seem that the state legislator at the moment, not that it can't be changed moving forward, but it is pretty clear as to who can get these on the medical side. And so just the longer that's drug out, I just see it that it's more damage really to the patients who need that, who aren't even a part of this conversation, but also maybe can't get out of their house or go to the store or whatever it may be.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm going to put up the next slide real quick. I think it's a little bit of a gear shift, but I think there's some important topics in this next slide, which I think are important.
Before you switch gears, I was in queue for a question.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
And so I first want to remind everybody that this is the marijuana equity work group. But second, I just want to
let me interrupt real quick, Councilman Sedabaka. This is the marijuana licensing work group. So that's the title of it.
In licensing, that was what it was sold as. And so I want us to remember that, you know, we legalized on the backs of people of color because we were saying we wanted to decriminalize. And so while I understand and have many people who need the medical delivery, I think that we cannot have these conversations separately. I want to know from you all, Molly, what would be the proposal, considering that we broke state law to legalize in the first place? What is the real barrier from us doing the launch of both of them at the same time? And what would be your proposal for an equitable approach to more quickly opening up the licenses for delivery?
So I don't think we have a proposal yet. That's why we're taking this input and this feedback right now. And when we have a proposal, you know, we'll bring that forward and make that public. And definitely we'll get into a lot of those details over the next couple of meetings here. And I don't know that there isn't a barrier to launching both medical and retail at the same time. In my opinion, what I was saying by a head start to medical is if those existing medical dispensaries that are out there right now have a head start, does that get them kind of set up with the market, and then the transporters and retail you know, outlets that come later on down the road, are they not given, you know, they're not able to start at the same time? And so, you know, I'm just trying to put out what the questions and the different considerations are, and then trying to take your feedback. So we're hearing everything that everybody's saying, and then we'll develop all that into a proposal, including what equity applicants and what an equity program might look like.
Perhaps we could allow the delivery services to our current licensees who are people of color or from marginalized groups at this point.
And
so
Molly, we have Jessica Scardina and Michelle Garcia on queue too.
Okay, so go ahead, Jessica, and then we'll jump to Michelle.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I just wanted to point out really quickly, going back to Councilman Hines and Mr. Tatum's comments regarding an expeditious rollout of medical delivery, that the local jurisdiction isn't actually required to issue a local license or permit under the state regulations. So it just requires permission from the local jurisdiction. So Denver could conceivably pass the ordinance or resolution and allow medical delivery to move forward without actually issuing the license or taking the time that it would need to go through that process. So that's an option.
Okay, so Michelle. If you're there, Michelle Garcia.
Yeah, it just takes forever for me to unmute.
You're fine.
I wanted to follow up on something that Truman said about sort of, you know, different ways to look at equity and achieve equity. In addition to the licensing opportunity, there's investment by cities. There's also the example of Evanston, Illinois, that has a reparations program that's funded through a surcharge on their cannabis sales. So in addition to having the jurisdiction fund, perhaps a surcharge might be a way that we could expedite delivery and also put money back into the community that was most harmed by the war on drugs.
Excellent queuing up of the next slide, Michelle. Let's move on to that one, which is the discussion around the surcharge. So let me bring that up real quick. Okay, so cross-jurisdictional delivery is really how I titled this, but it's about the surcharge, which was included in the statute. So the statute says, well, first of all, the statute says that an ordinance adopted pursuant to the section that allows us to adopt an ordinance opting into delivery may prohibit delivery of medical marijuana or medical marijuana products from a medical marijuana store that is outside of municipalities, counties, or city and counties jurisdictional boundaries to an address within its jurisdictional boundaries. And the same provision exists on the retail side. So it basically just says Denver can say that we will not allow deliveries from surrounding jurisdictions or any jurisdiction outside of Denver. So the question one is, should Denver allow for deliveries into the city from stores located outside the city, and whether we should have any different restrictions if we allow for cross-jurisdictional deliveries, if there should be any different requirements. The $1 surcharge comes into play here. There's a $1 surcharge placed on each delivery and is remitted to the municipality where the licensed marijuana store is located. And it's supposed to be for law enforcement costs related to marijuana enforcement. So when you're thinking about cross-jurisdictional deliveries, that $1 surcharge goes to the location of the store. Colorado's online sales tax rules state that it requires all businesses who sell goods to customers in their state to assess sales tax based on the customer's address, not on the location of the business. So while the $1 surcharge is based on the location of the store, the sales tax is based on the location of the delivery. And so I'm just want everybody to kind of think of deliveries into Denver and deliveries out of Denver. And the revenue impact that could have in all different kinds of directions. So right now, Denver has a retail, we collect sales tax, our standard sales tax on all medical marijuana sales. We have, on the retail side, we collect our standard sales tax, and then we have a special sales tax that's right now at 5.5% for all retail marijuana sales. And that is in addition and above and beyond the standard sales tax. And so those are things, you know, if we had deliveries outside of Denver, anybody that may have been coming into Denver from a jurisdiction that doesn't allow for it could have been coming into Denver. And now if that delivery location is outside of Denver, that sales tax goes to that jurisdiction. And so we have the $1 surcharge, and is there opportunity to kind of look at that as well as and is there anything we can do for revenue offset of that? Other considerations when we're talking about cross-jurisdictional deliveries are patient access, competitive advantages and disadvantages for Denver stores, oversight and enforcement, and then obviously that revenue impact statement. So with that, anybody want to chime in? I just messed something up.
I have a question.
Yes, who's speaking?
This is Sarah Woodson, the color of cannabis.
Yep.
The $1 surcharge, is there an estimated amount already on what that revenue amount could look like? And does the majority of all, or does that revenue have to be redirected back into law enforcement, or could a portion of that revenue be redirected into some type of social equity fund?
So I mean, we'll have to figure out if we have additional law enforcement costs, right? And then, and then we could get some attorney input on how much, like what the language is around that requirement. But I believe we could also talk about, I don't know if we're limited also from additional surcharges in addition to the $1 surcharge when we're talking about social equity funding or other opportunities for to offset revenue losses if there is that. We have been trying to come up with how to estimate what the $1 surcharge would generate, as well as what we might lose if we're talking about deliveries that go outside of Denver. We're playing around with some numbers and looking at that. If anybody has some ideas around how to estimate some of that, we'd love to have your input. And they're pretty easy numbers to run once we just had some estimates, but would love some input on that as well. And if Anshul or Ian or anybody want to chime in on that $1 surcharge and the legal language around it, feel free.
Thank you.
Any other comments on the cross-jurisdictional challenges?
This is Jackie Fluke from Drizzly. Can I just add to that question that Sarah was asking about what realistically will be the demand for delivery? I spoke with the regulators in Oregon, where delivery has been legal for over 3 years and still less than 1% of all their legal cannabis sales are sold through delivery. I can tell you in alcohol before COVID, it was nationally less than 1% of all the alcohol that was sold nationally was sold through e-commerce. So I think that's a really good question to talk about here of what do you think the initial demand will be? Is it this immediate influx of all these deliveries going out, or is this something like other e-commerce products that we're all used to? It took people a while to get comfortable buying their shoes online and buying their furniture online. And COVID has changed that, but I think that's a really good question to try and answer.
I don't know. Any industry experts want to give us some opinions on that, or has anybody looked at some other jurisdictions?
This is Dan Pabone. Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So don't have any real hard data on cannabis specifically, but with respect to just customer loyalty through a delivery program and recognizing a brand as opposed to a store location, wherever it may be, is kind of where the industry is moving. So with that as a baseline, you would expect that folks aren't necessarily, even when they're going online to do a delivery of a product, they're not thinking about where is the store located. They're looking at, does this have my product that's produced by this particular store location, right? So for the delivery, it's going to be for the consumer, the delivery is going to be fairly seamless for all of us on the background with respect to the fees and the taxes. That's where the rubber is going to meet the road. So with that in mind, it sounds like there's an opportunity here. I'd have to look through my municipal authority law books, but it seems like you could put a surcharge on a delivery coming into the city, and or potential make it if you can't, if the fee doesn't work, then make it a taxable event and vice versa. And I think probably the most important thing that the city would want to do is separate it out from its general collection, so it doesn't become part of the 5.5% or anything like that. Otherwise, it will get lost in the shuffle. But I bet you could create a fairly decent sized program just off of something like that. And I think from the consumer perspective, again, I don't think people are going to think, okay, well, I'm ordering this product in Denver and I'm getting it delivered to me in Edgewater, so I'm going to, balk at that purchase because I'm going to get an additional, 5% on my bill. I think it's just people are going to start ordering based on brand. And so I think, we're talking about this in 2020, but consumers aren't thinking about it the way that we're thinking about it.
Okay. Thanks for those comments. Next, we have Councilman Hines up, and then Truman.
Yep, thank you. Chris Hines, Denver City Council. So as you probably know, I've already had a couple stakeholder meetings as a council person about delivery, and the topic has come up. I haven't really found a compelling reason why we should limit it to arbitrary geographic lines like city borders. But from a regulatory perspective, I don't see why a business couldn't do that that extra legwork, to make sure that they're taxing appropriately, because, well, that's the law. And so I'd be willing to support that if a business cannot figure out how to make sure that the taxes are based on regulation, as in where the customer is or whatever, then perhaps those businesses, should make sure that they have that technology before they do business in Denver. So I'm just throwing that out there. Thank you.
Yeah, interesting comment. Truman?
Yeah, I think it's interesting talking about what the potential demand for this would be. I think the post-COVID world is different. I will be shaking less people's hands now. I'm just a little bit more kind of cautious about that and considering delivery as an option when possible. You know, a big barrier to cannabis currently is the lack of e-commerce options. You know, most credit cards are not open to cannabis industries, and so that will retard this process, right? The rollout of any kind of delivery. You know, the actual changing hands of money is going to be a challenge, and I'm confident that one day there will be a cannabis industry that can operate just like everybody else, but that day is not today.
Okay. Any other comments on this topic? Happy to move on. We've got several more if we want to keep going.
Wait, I just had a suggestion on how we might estimate demand. And
sure, yes.
So I don't know if Drizzly would be able to share the difference between sort of what the pre-COVID rate of alcohol purchases were versus the post-COVID, if we have that data collected, because we might be able to extrapolate from that the demand difference between in-store and Truman. You don't think that would work? No.
I was misunderstanding where you were headed with this.
So if we're looking for a statistical representation of revenue generation, we can estimate what the difference would be in change in behavior in the cannabis space by looking at the change in behavior in the alcohol space, is what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, I'm with you now.
Yeah.
I can share that the change with COVID has been in alcohol delivery an increase of anywhere from 300 to 400%.
But then that would still only be like 3 to 4% of total alcohol sales, even during COVID, are being done through e-commerce. Am I understanding that right?
No, I don't know. I can't answer what percent of alcohol sales are being done through e-commerce during COVID. I don't have that information, and I think that is definitely skewed since all on-premise restaurants and bars are closed. So I don't know that that would translate into post-COVID times, but I can say that our platform has seen depending on the day, between a 300 and 400% increase in orders during COVID with all the on-premise outlets shut down.
Yeah. Do we also know what California's proportion of delivery sales versus live sales are? We might be able to use that data to inform what our potential revenue might look like.
Yeah, I think the additional complication of that data is not just percentage of sales that are delivery, but the percentage of sales that are delivered that are outside of the jurisdiction, right? So that cross those jurisdictional boundaries, that's what we would need in order to know what the decrease we would see in sales tax revenue.
And is there a reason there can't be an intra Denver surcharge that supports social equity?
We are looking into that.
Okay.
Yes. We're looking into what our kind of taxing and surcharging capabilities and authorities are.
Okay.
And who would bear the burden of the tax? The companies or the buyer?
Well, it depends on what the tax was and how we applied it.
So in Evanston, they apply the surcharge to the buyer, and then the surcharge is applied to the community that was sort of most greatly impacted by the war on drugs. But there could probably be an argument for reinvesting in communities that have disproportionate placement of facilities as well.
So we'll take some look at that Evanston kind of case study, and if we gather some information, we can send that around to the group as well. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have anybody in the queue at the moment. And just remember, we can revisit any of these topics in future meetings too. So if you have a brilliant thought that comes up later, we can take it during written comment or in a future meeting. So let me move on to the next one, which I'm hoping we can get through somewhat quickly, and then maybe one or two more questions. So the next question is around hours of operations. And just what should the hours of operation for marijuana delivery be? Right now, Denver's retail medical marijuana stores are able to operate between the hours of 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. The MED rule allows deliveries to be made only between the hours of 8 a.m. and midnight, and delivery orders to be accepted 24 hours a day. So you could get on your computer and place the order at any time, but it's only going to actually be showing up at your house between 8 a.m. and midnight. Some extra considerations are public safety, neighborhoods and where those deliveries are occurring, consumer convenience, and patient access. Thoughts from any work group members?
Has the police person joined us yet?
Yes, Lieutenant, are you here and you want to chime in?
Yes, thank you. I'm still here. You know, from police perspective, certainly it seems to make sense to align the hours with the same hours of the dispensaries. As of now, it seems that if you're delivering later and then all of a sudden you run out of product and you go back to the dispensary to get the product and then the doors opened at 11:59 or 11 o'clock, is that going to increase, you know, the availability of some crime on that property from, you know, an outside entity just kind of waiting for the delivery person to come back? So it seems to me that the hours should be aligned from a safety perspective.
This is John Bailey asking the policeman a question. What has been the conversation internally relative to the differential between medical delivery and potential for recreation delivery?
You know, we haven't really, in our conversations, separated the two. Our conversations, as I stated when I introduced myself, has really been around the safety. I mean, you know, if this is what the community wants, obviously we will participate and do our part to make it work. We just want to make sure that it's safe for everybody, including the dispensaries and the people delivering and the consumers. That's really our focus on, and how can we do this safely? How can we do it so we can educate all the officers through the process? That's what we're focusing on. We haven't focused on the difference between the medical and recreational.
The reason I asked the question is that at some point with the disparities that are going on in public safety, it's easy kind of to recognize the medical delivery. But what is the scenario? What is the landscape? What is the support? What is the surveillance? What is the delivery potential as you go into the door? Do you pick up at the front? Do you come out to the car? What are the scenarios that will allow things not to get confusing based on the fact that we have a disproportionate number of Black and brown folks being arrested? One, not necessarily for cannabis now, but there's so many that are still in jail for prior cannabis arrests. How do we separate, and that's my point, how do we separate any distinction, or has there been any conversation? And if not, there should be, because if we're now talking about one, having med come in early, or two come in simultaneously with rec delivery, then there should be some conversation, I think, from police departments and local municipalities to be able to talk about if these things are about to happen. What is our discussion internally to be able to make sure that we don't make inappropriate mistakes relative to arrest?
Sure, I understand what you're saying, and I respect your question, and I'm not implying there hasn't been conversation, and that's certainly why the police department and excise and license asked me to be on this panel, and certainly for us.
And we appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and certainly for us, you know, education of the officers is really key, and education of the delivery personnel is key. So both entities have an understanding of what's going on. We certainly don't want to put anybody, including our officers and including the delivery personnel, in a position of vulnerability that we don't need to put them in. So I think one of the key things that we're interested in is really the guidelines or the rules that are going to govern the delivery, as far as the security of the product, the security of the money, as somebody else mentioned, cash only. So then that delivery driver is potentially going to be carrying cash.
That's
how do
right.
how do we protect that delivery driver? How do we do that and set up non-restrictive or too authoritative guidelines, but how do we, respecting the will of the voters, like we've done since, or we tried to do since the beginning of legalization, how do we do that and keep everybody safe? And that's really why I'm here.
Molly, we have Chris, Truman, Jessica on the queue, as well as Jacqueline. And I'm just going to remind everybody to please announce yourself when you start to speak. Thank you.
All right, so who was that first then? Councilman Hines? Or did we already do that one?
Yeah, Hines first.
Okay.
So yes, thank you, Chris Hines, Denver City Council. So I have also, in part of my research, done just a comment from the lieutenant's comment. I've done some research with our law enforcement, and certainly that is a legitimate concern. We want to make sure that our drivers are protected and safe. We also want to make sure our pizza drivers are protected and safe. And so this isn't a kind of a new foray. This is something that we are considering already. Not to diminish the lieutenant's comment. I think what he's trying to say is certainly valid. I think, but I would ask, unless I'm wrong, from what I understand from other law enforcement officials, the same premise that we use to protect our delivery drivers for pizzas, we also can use to protect our cannabis delivery drivers. The difference, however, is that our pizza delivery drivers have big signs on the cars that say "pizza here," and state law requires that the vehicles that deliver cannabis be unmarked. And pizza delivery doesn't have any cameras or a locked box. And I believe those are also state law as well, that there must be at least 2 cameras, and that the cannabis should be or must be transported in a locked container. So even if the driver does get held up, they might be out the money, but if I'm going to prioritize money or drugs, I would much rather that, and maybe they actually store the money in the protected box too. Anyway, just some extra thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, so I think the next, it was Truman, and then Jacqueline, and then Sarah Woodson.
Quick comment here. It was interesting to hear from the folks from law enforcement about the concerns about, the stores after 10 p.m. being open, because, from a decade of experience running my own shops as well as being a part of the marijuana industry group, the crime that we've typically seen, while it has been relatively low, has almost exclusively been after hours when no one is there. And so I guess the question for law enforcement would be, would that change for delivery if there are folks at the store? Because there appear to be far more burglaries, aka with no people, than robberies, when there are people there.
So sure. Lieutenant, you want to respond to that, and then we'll go on to the next questions?
Sure. And you're absolutely correct that burglaries is the major challenge with both dispensaries and grow locations. In fact, we've had you probably got our letters. People in the industry probably got our letters recently about the increase we've had. The concern is, and I heard somebody commenting the difference between the pizza delivery and the marijuana delivery is that the marijuana delivery is all cash. So just the concern for us is there going to be a pattern? Are people going to start to follow them around and see, okay, they're going back to the dispensary at 11 o'clock at night. There aren't a lot of people here. It's not open. I'm hoping it never happens. I'm not trying to predict that it's going to happen. That's just something that we look at. What are all the possibilities, and how can we mitigate the risk to anybody's life? And that's what we're looking at. And hopefully that answers your question, sir. Okay.
Jacqueline?
Hi, Jacqueline Fluke, Drizzly. To your original question, Molly, what we're frequently telling regulators and retailers in terms of delivery is that from a very practical sense, that delivery shouldn't go out within the last hour of the store's operation, because from time to time there are deliveries that can't be completed for numerous reasons. Sometimes the person who placed the order isn't there. Sometimes there's a typo in the address. Whatever the reason is, that delivery person needs to be able to get back to the store to make sure that that product is in the store and not sitting with them individually or personally overnight after the store is closed. So we always recommend that it's the best practice that deliveries don't go out within the last hour of closing to give time for any situations like that.
Great. Sarah Woodson? Oh, you're on mute, Sarah.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. So 2 things. One is directly tied to what Jacqueline just said. Considering, and also what Truman said, considering the fact that a lot of burglaries are happening after hours. Does it make sense for delivery to align with the same time as, you know, the hours of operation opening and closing? Because like what Jacqueline said, if you have a delivery that goes out at like 9:45, but the store closes at 10, there'd have to be some type of personnel that would still have to be there to make sure the delivery driver gets back. And there's just all type of different variables. And so I would think that it might make more sense for delivery to stop 1 hour before. But then I thought of another thing as well, and this is more directed to the lieutenant. Does allowing delivery to happen after 12 p.m. help to reduce people that are driving under the intoxication of marijuana? Like, has there been any studies that look at, you know, when is the highest time that people get stopped for driving? And then if you did allow delivery to happen after 10 p.m., would that type of service reduce those type of things for public health and safety? And then final comment, one of the things, and this is kind of what John Bailey was talking about, when we're having conversations with our members, because we have a lot of members that are interested in delivery, there is a real true concern that people of color that run delivery businesses will be negatively impacted and undergo scrutiny from police. And so I'm just wondering, when we talk about creating the equity, how do you bring that kind of comfort in where you can feel comfortable opening a delivery business as a person of color, and you don't have to worry about being pulled over with large amounts of cash and marijuana on you and possibly, you know, losing your life in that type of scenario? So those are my comments and questions. Thank you.
Anything you want to add, Lieutenant Howard?
I will speak to the question about the DUI driving under any influence data. I can get that for the next meeting as to the specifics of what time. I can tell you from, and I work in narcotics, I don't work in traffic, but from my experience, we haven't seen a surge in impaired drivers that are leaving the location where they purchased to go to their home, because they're usually not consuming at that location. They're not supposed to be, certainly. So we haven't seen that I've been aware of, but I can dig a little deeper and find out about the times for sure. But the experiences or the conversations that we've had with people that have been contacted DUI, they're not consuming at the dispensary where they're purchasing it.
Thank you. So let me just check on one thing. Jessica, it looked like you had a question, but then you said maybe we were removed. Do you have a comment, or are you good?
My earlier point was covered in the discussion, but I did want to note on a separate note that regardless of what the hours of delivery would be, I think it's important to allow patients and consumers to place orders, even if the delivery itself can't be conducted at that time, just to, increase efficiency for patients and consumers, people who work crazy hours, nights and early mornings, stuff like that.
Okay. Okay, so we only have 4 minutes left. So we didn't make it through every single question. So what I think we'll do is we had played around with the idea of sending around some structured kind of templates, worksheets for you guys to fill in some of your responses to these questions. So basically, we'll just take the questions that were in the PowerPoint and put them into some type of document. And if you want to use that to guide your written comments, if you have more comments on some of these questions, that'll be an opportunity to do so in just kind of a structured way. So we'll get that out to you in the next day or so and give you opportunity. And also, if there's anything that you guys want to revisit in our next meeting, please definitely do. Let us know. And then maybe just to close it out, and I think this will tee us up for some good conversations going forward as well. Jacqueline, if you're still there, I know that, and I think this is relevant to many of the conversations that we had kind of an hour or so ago. I think Drizzly has an incubator program for social equity businesses. And so if you could just kind of give us an overview of that, and that's something we could all kind of think about over the next 2 weeks.
Sure. Drizzly has been working with incubator programs in Massachusetts on that social equity delivery only license that I was speaking about. And that's what made me really question some of the statements here that the capital costs were high for delivery businesses, because that's not what we have seen in Massachusetts. But I will double check the regulations to see if there's something different there. And so we have been working with companies that are in the application process for those social equity delivery license. And I plan to submit more about that in the written comments after this meeting.
Right.
Excuse me, Jessica, isn't it true in Massachusetts, though, there are two types of social equity, the dual license, one for geographic participation and the other for participation based on ownership, employee, or auxiliary businesses?
And that's John Bailey, by the way, Jack.
Okay. The social equity is done in a couple of ways in Massachusetts. There is social equity for dispensary requirements that revolve around the dispensaries and their social equity, but there's a social equity license for, it's called the delivery only license, that for the first 2 years, what would be the transporter license that you're talking about for Denver, that type of license is only available to people who qualify for social equity.
No, I was talking about relative to your incubator type, that there's one is geographic and the other is individual participation based on where you want to come into the industry. So I mean, there's a somewhat of a different approach there, wouldn't you say?
The incubator programs that we've been involved with for social equity are around that delivery only license, the transportator.
Okay.
License.
All right. That's fine.
Okay. I was going to say any final thoughts, but we've got 1 minute left, so I'm just going to let you put your final thoughts in written comment, and we'll go from there. But thank you guys. This was a really great conversation. I really appreciate it. Ashley, if you're still on, anything you want to close with? Oh, there you are. Oh, you're on mute. Nope. Still can't hear you.
Okay, how's that?
There you go. Now we can.
Just want to say that was a great conversation, and I'm so glad we went forward with this, you know, even though it was a little rocky at first, but that was great, so informative, and I think it also worked really well with everybody feeling comfortable either to chime in when there's a good opportunity or use the chat. So wonderful. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate everything you guys put into this. Great meeting.
Definitely.
And Molly, great job. Thank you, Molly.
Oh, thank you. Yep, we'll send out lots of information, and we'll see you guys on May 28th.
28th.
All
Everybody
right.
have a great day.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.